Hero Hunter Garou. In the world of One Punch Man, there are both powerful heroes and villains that have an entire justice system based around them. But there is one person in particular who stands up to this system, one who outright states his rejection of it, and the one that has both the power and dedication to face it head on. The most powerful student of Bang, Garou, a master of martial arts with physical abilities that surpass that of superhuman, and intelligence that's able to learn/adapt to others' fighting style while also improving his own, and there are so many more. Which is exactly why today we're here to see exactly how things would go if Garou's memories, skills, and abilities have been transferred over to the world of MHA. What if Deku was Garou's reincarnation? Thank you to the person who recommended this what if idea. I hope you enjoy as well as everyone watching. And besides that, I don't got much else to say, so with that being said, let's get started.
You're never gonna make it, you're not good enough. There's a million other people with the same stuff. You really think you're different? Man, you must be kidding. Think you're gonna hit it, but you just don't get it. It's impossible, it's not probable, you're irresponsible. Too many obstacles, you gotta stop it, yo. You gotta take it slow, you can't be a pro. Don't waste your time no more. Who the fuck are you to tell me what to do?
Alright guys, it's time for us to begin the what if, but before we do, I do want to give a warning to those that have not read the One Punch Man manga. If you guys have not read the One Punch Man manga and do not want to get spoiled for it, then I do not recommend you guys watch this what if, considering the fact that there will be some spoilers for the One Punch Man manga. So once again, giving you guys a warning, do not watch this what if you guys do not want to get spoiled. But if you guys do not care for spoilers, or if you guys read the manga, then please let us continue on. As now with that being said, let's begin this what if. So to begin the what if, we're now going to start off with Garou's perspective, as it will be Garou right after his fight with Saitama, as we see the two of them now crashing down to earth with Garou now defeated. Now when Garou ends up getting up, as he couldn't believe just how powerful Saitama was, he would then get a good look around the entire area to see something horrifying, as he will see that the entirety of Earth's population, even though Garou's as well as Saitama's fight was literally multiple light years away from this planet, the effects of their fight still reached all the way up to here, as now the entirety of Earth's population had been wiped out just because of their fight alone. Literally the shockwaves of their fight were so strong that he literally wiped out the entire planet along with Saitama. As this caused Garou to be horrified until suddenly he sees someone that causes his heart to literally sink. He sees the young child that he had befriended during the time of him, just simply hunting down heroes and when he was still just a human. As this kid saw Garou as his uncle or as a cool older brother. And now Garou sees that kid currently on the ground right in front of him, as the kid had unfortunately passed away due to the collision between Garou and Saitama. Now when Garou sees this, he immediately rushes over as he just tries to cling onto a little bit of hope of trying to see if maybe there was a miracle that could happen to prove that this kid was okay after everything. But no matter how many times he checked and no matter how many times he shaked the kid to make sure that he was alright, unfortunately he got no response, as there was no way the kid could survive any of that. There was no way anyone could, except for Garou as well as Saitama right now. And coming to this sudden realization would cause Garou to break down completely, as he collapses down to his knees, as he curses himself, this power, and really everything about the whole situation, as this wasn't really how things were supposed to go. No, Garou was really doing this for a positive, well, not positive, but a reason that he truly felt that was right, as he couldn't stand the system that this entire world was operating at, where those that were popular and much more fortunate had a word and say in everything, while those that weren't as popular or as fortunate as them were pretty much just left behind and ignored by society, as he thought that with his actions alone that he could fix it, but now there was really nothing else to fix. In fact, there was no society, there was no justice system, there was just nothing, except for him and Saitama. As this realization once again caused Garou to break down even more, as he just curses himself and really everything, as he just tries to think of something, anything that could possibly fix this, until eventually he finally comes up with it. Using the powers that had been bestowed upon him by the god of the One Punch Man world, we will then see Garou then begin to teach the ways of time traveling to Saitama, basically explaining how Saitama can fix all this, as he thought that this was the only way to redeem himself for everything that happened. This was the only way for his nephew or younger brother to survive. As this is where we will then see Garou fully begin to explain everything about the whole time traveling technique to Saitama, with Saitama not understanding anything, but Garou was okay with that, as he already know that somehow, someway, Saitama will figure it out. But unfortunately for Garou, he wouldn't be able to see too much of how Saitama was going to do it. As right then and there, this is where we would then see the god of the One Punch Man world then begin to actually use his powers to wipe out the rest of this ruined timeline, with Garou within it. As we then see Garou's body then begin to break down, as we see him lose pieces of his bodies on the ground as they begin to crumble to dust. And not only that, but we also see the entirety of the galaxy, or what was left of it, then also be crumbling to dust as well. As basically the entirety of the world that Garou was in this timeline at least, was getting wiped out. As Garou will be looking around and seeing everything and seeing his body collapse, he would then see Saitama as somehow, someway, Saitama had been able to go back in time. And seeing this right before his eyes caused Garou to actually smile, as he now knows that society was going to be brought back. Saitama was most definitely going to stop him right before he caused all this damage. And more importantly, as Garou then turns to the young child, the child that befriended him, the child that he saw as a younger brother, he would then smile as he now knows that 100% that kid's going to be able to live a normal life now. He's going to be able to continue on growing up. And this time Garou was not going to be there to screw everything up for him. As with that, we would then see Garou then actually smile one last time, thanking Saitama for everything, while also saying goodbye to the child, as well as Bang, his old master, before finally succumbing to darkness. As just like that, Garou as well as the rest of this ruined timeline had been wiped out of existence. Or, at least that's what Garou had thought. As this is where we now do a time skip. Flashing forward through the years, after the events that happened between Garou as well as Saitama, we now set our eyes upon an entirely new era, this being the era of quirks and more importantly the My Hero era. As we now set our eyes upon one particular boy, this being none other than Izuku Midoriya, who, for the sake of this what if, I'm simply going to call him Deku. As we see Deku currently right now sitting at the back of the class all by himself, watching as the rest of the kids went out to hang with their friends, as Deku actually preferred it this way. And the main reason why is because of the fact that Deku was still trying to come to terms with everything that just recently happened, as we now do a flashback. So turning to the very beginning of the day, we see Deku as he'll be dropped off at school by his mother, as we then see him try to head off to class, as it was supposed to be a very simple and normal day. But as Deku was making his way to class, this is when suddenly he gets hit with an intense headache, one so strong that it causes him to fall unconscious, right in front of a nearby teacher as she would then rush towards him. As after that, this is where we would then see Deku then be dropped off at the nurse's office, as he would just simply lay there getting treated by the nurse as she tries to get into contact with his mother. But as she was in the process of doing this is when suddenly Deku would then wake up, as he then reveals to her that he was fine. Now of course the nurse had to truly check Deku to see if he was really okay, but in the process of her checking him, she would then realize something very important. This being the fact that Deku's entire facial expression, and not only that but the energy he was giving off, had completely changed, making him seem as if he was an entirely different person. As after giving Deku a checkup and seeing that he was okay, we would then see the nurse send him off with a worried look on her face, with Deku thanking her for everything as we then see him head off. But just as Deku was making his way to class, however, this is when suddenly he would then stop, as this is when he would then focus on his hand, as he closes his eyes as well as take a deep breath, as he begins to concentrate on it extremely hard. And when he does, this is when suddenly it will then happen. Cosmic energy, one that has not been felt for a very long time, then begins to radiate out of Deku's hand, as it will be so powerful that Deku actually panics and immediately stops what he was doing, as seeing what just happened had confirmed Deku's suspicions, as well as his greatest fears. As somehow, some way, after his fight with Saitama, after his entire timeline got erased along with him in it, and after his soul had laid dormant for many years, Garou's soul had been reawakened, as he had been successfully reincarnated as Izuku Midoriya. And to make things even worse is the fact that he got reincarnated with the very abilities that caused that tragic timeline to happen in the first place, the power that God had bestowed upon him. As this is where we now cut back to the present. So we see Deku once again, as currently right now him and his class will be at a playground as they were currently on break. As we would see Deku once again by himself, as he was still trying to come to terms with everything that just recently happened and trying to figure out exactly why was he still alive, why was he reincarnated. As after all, he knows for sure that he was erased during the time of him being in that ruined timeline, yet here he was once again, still alive, and not only that but still having the cosmic abilities. It just simply did not make any sense. But unfortunately for Garou, or should I say Deku, there was nothing he can really do about it. As after thinking things over for the last time, eventually we would then see him collapse down to the ground, as he was just mentally exhausted by this point. As we see him look up into the sky as he begins recalling memories of his old life, and more importantly everything that happened to lead to that ruined timeline. As he ends up focusing on the last bit of memories that he had about the whole event, and more importantly about what happened to the kid he saw as a younger brother. As just recalling the event once again caused Deku to feel a enormous amount of guilt, as this is where Deku would then calmly admit that he was tired. As he was tired with all the events that happened in the previous timeline. As he was tired from his fight with Saitama, he was tired with all the destruction that he caused, and overall, he was just tired of messing everything up. He was sad about the fact that the only few people that he cared about in that old timeline were killed off all because of him, because of his own actions. And just thinking about it even more caused him to feel even more guilty, as we see Deku just simply lay down there, continuously looking up into the sky, as he tries to wonder exactly what is his next move. But just as Deku was laying down there, this is when he then comes to a decision. As after feeling guilty about all the events that happened, and after being tired of doing harm to others, this is when we would then see Deku then decide that he just wants to live a honest to normal life. He didn't want to cause any more harm and damage to others, and more or less, he just doesn't want to repeat about what happened in the old timeline. As now with his mind clear and a goal set, this is where we now do another time skip. Flashing forward through the years, we end up seeing Deku once again, as we see that Deku had remained dedicated to his promise, as he spent the rest of his time in school living a normal life without any real problems. He was able to go up the grades all the way to his final year of high school without any real big difficulties, even when it was revealed that he was quirkless. As whenever anyone tried to bully him for it, like Bakugo or really anyone else that had a so-called very powerful quirk and that they were trying to become the #1 hero, Deku would easily be able to ignore them. And if they were ballsy enough to even try to attack him, he was easily able to dodge all their attacks, but never once throwing his own. Which would cause all the bullies to get quickly annoyed with Deku, even Bakugo, as none of them were able to get him mad, none of them were able to make him fear them, and none of them were even able to land a single hit on him. So due to that, they just simply left him alone. As even though Deku had decided to live a normal life, he still decided to train his body, so that way he was able to use his old martial arts style when needed. Considering the fact that in this world there are still multiple dangers out there, and he wanted to use something other than cosmic powers for self-defense. And speaking of his cosmic powers, he came to the quick realization that in this world he didn't have as much control over them as he did in his old life. And the main reason for this one is because of the fact that Deku's body currently isn't as strong as his old one. So due to that, he doesn't have as much control. So as a way to make up for it, we will see him continuously train his body every single day, in order for him to be strong enough to be able to have enough control over his cosmic powers. As we now finally turn our attention to Deku in the present. As we see Deku currently right now working at a nearby restaurant that was close to his house. As you see, Deku will be in the process of just simply living his life by this point, as he was already heading off to his final year of high school, and not only that, but his entire schedule has been completely booked for every single day, as his entire routine basically consists of working, training, studying, helping his mother, and also helping around the community, as basically everything was perfect with his life. Although there was one thing that was very annoying, this being the fact that everyone in this world still has the same obsession when it came to heroes. Now, to someone who very much did not like the whole concept of hero and villains, to hear that people are once again still obsessed with it even now got under Deku's skin consistently. Especially when it came to people telling him that he will be a great hero, to which he definitely knows that's not true, or people just simply telling how great of a hero they're gonna be, which Deku just consistently gets annoyed with. But still, nonetheless, Deku does still remember his goal here, as even though he was annoyed with the whole hero system, he did came to the decision to let them do whatever they want, as long as they left him alone. As it was still crazy to Deku that even after so many years by now, he still had a grudge when it came to the whole hero system. But as long as they left him alone, then he will leave them alone. As after finally coming to that conclusion, we now see Deku as he continues on living this life of his in pure peace, as there's really nothing bad going on. As by the time that Deku finally finishes off his last year of high school, we see that everyone that goes to UA in the main timeline goes to UA, all the while Deku gets left behind. But the thing is, that's exactly what Deku wanted, as we see him continue living his life, and this is when he actually comes to the realization of something. He finally realized exactly how Saitama felt, as even though he was extremely powerful, so powerful enough that he can firmly declare himself as the strongest person alive in this timeline, he does not feel a single bit of happiness due to it, as now he finally understands just how lonely and empty it is to be the strongest. But this was something that Deku had to live with. As we now move forward with the story, as we see Deku continuously live this life of his, as he continues trying his best to atone for his sins of the past, while also trying his best to make sure that he doesn't cause any more harm to others. But unaware to Deku was the fact that on a very certain day, all that would then change. As turning to a very certain night, we will see Deku now finishing up his last bit of deliveries for the restaurant. As currently right now, he was now heading back in order to close it, considering the fact that it was his job to do it today. But as Deku was on the ride back, this is when suddenly he would then soon encounter a little girl, who had just simply ran onto the street and looked like to be on the verge of collapsing. Now when Deku sees this, he immediately stops the motorcycle that he was riding, as he immediately hops off it and rushes over to the girl, checking to see if she was alright. As by the time that Deku had been able to get a good look at her, he would see that the girl's arm had been covered up in bandages. Not only that, but she was extremely pale, and she looked to be terrified for her life as well as exhausted. As he would then see the girl then turn to him before asking him for help, as she would then fall into unconsciousness, with Deku of course catching her. Now Deku didn't understand the whole situation about what was going on, but he does know that this girl was very ill and needed help. So immediately he would then hop onto his bike and drive to the closest hospital, but unaware to Deku was the fact that someone had been watching him and was now currently following him. As we now do a little bit of a time skip. So we see Deku by the time he had dropped off the girl at the hospital, as by this point she was already, being checked for any injuries, as well as to see if there was any mental problems or any illness that she might be going through. And along the way there, Deku also had called out the police, as they're already beginning to, ask the girl questions, but also questioning Deku. And by the time that Deku had given them all the answers that they needed, they thanked him for his service, as Deku tells them that he needs to head off for a little bit in order to close up the restaurant, but he does swear that he's going to come back. As after doing so, we would then see Deku hop onto his bike as he rushes over to the restaurant, as he'll be in the process of closing it, washing all the dishes that were there, turning off all the lights, as the very last thing he needed to do was simply close the door. But as Deku was in the process of doing this is when suddenly multiple individuals would then walk in, with Deku telling them that the restaurant is closed. But instead of saying anything to Deku or leaving the restaurant, this is when suddenly Deku hears a bunch of guns then be drawn towards him, as he finally ends up turning around to see that multiple individuals in black were now pointing multiple guns at him, with the leader then stepping up, explaining to Deku about the whole situation, informing Deku that that little girl that he helped out belonged to someone very important, and telling Deku that if he didn't give her back, then there will be some very serious consequences. As after saying his threat, this is when suddenly all the men would then prepare to open fire, just waiting for the leader's command. And Deku, in response to all of this, as multiple armed men are right in front of him, ready to open fire on just the leader's words alone, Deku just simply looks at all of them with a blank and bored expression, as by the time that Deku finally finished drying off the last dish, this is when he will then suddenly sigh before turning his attention back onto the group, as he will then give them a word of advice as well as a warning. As in a very bored and tired tone, we will then see Deku tell them that it's better to just simply leave the restaurant and forget about the whole ordeal, forget about the little girl, forget about their boss, and try to live a normal life. And he also does give them the warning, stating that the second that one of them pulls a trigger, they're really not going to like exactly how it's going to end. With all the men laughing at Deku in response to his obvious bluff, with the leader sighing as he tells Deku that he could have lived longer if he wasn't so stupid, as on his command he would then tell all the men to fire. But this will be their biggest mistake, as the moment that one of the men had pulled the trigger was all that Deku needed to take action. As in a blink of an eye, so fast that none of them were able to react, Deku had been able to actually grab the bullet in mid-air as it was getting shot out, and then what he did was immediately toss it right back into the man's shoulder, and right before the man could even feel the pain, he would then disarm all the men from all their weapons, and soon afterwards he would then brutally beat them all up, As all this happened in a blink of an eye, so fast that none of them were able to react. As by the time the leader would see that Deku would be gone, he then turns around only to see the disturbing sight, as he would see all his men laid out on the ground bloodied and defeated. All the while, Deku would just casually be there, leaning on a table as he'll be looking at the leader with a bored expression, as he's revealed to show that he has no injuries at all, and not only that, but his worker uniform didn't even have a single drop of blood, meaning that Deku did this all so fast that he didn't take any damage, and he didn't even get a little bit dirty after the fight. As the only sign that showed that Deku was in a fight at all was his bloody knuckles that were on full display. And the craziest thing was the fact that that wasn't even Deku's blood. That was the blood of the enemies he just recently took down. With Deku sighing as he tells the leader that he did give him a warning, with the leader backing away in fear, only for him to suddenly get very angry as he decides to activate his quirk, telling Deku that he will accomplish his mission for Overhaul, letting Deku know unknowingly exactly what's the leader's moniker. As is when suddenly the man will then transform into this pink-like Hulk monster as he looms over Deku with a furious expression, all the while Deku will look at him with a bored one. As the man would then suddenly throw a punch at Deku, with Deku responding with his own, as this is where in the next moment we will then see the man laid out on the ground, now completely exit out of his transformation and completely beaten up, just like the rest of his men. Meanwhile, Deku would be currently washing his hands, considering the fact that they were still very bloody from the fight, and he didn't want to get any of that blood on his worker uniform. As after finally washing his hands, Deku would then close up the rest of the restaurant after making sure to clean up and everything, and soon afterwards he would just casually toss the man out of the restaurant, call the police to turn them in, and once the police arrive, he would then hop back on his bike and drive to the hospital, with Deku being unaware about the fact that all this will be reported to someone, this being none other than Overhaul, as he would be informed by one of his grunts that the men that he sent out to retrieve Eri had failed, and that they were all defeated by one teenage boy. With Overhaul obviously getting mad at this, but soon calms himself down, as after all it's just one kid. As he will prepare his next set of villains to be sent towards him, as he knows that eventually that kid cannot handle all of them, and eventually when he falls he can get Eri back once again, as Eri would be revealed to be the girl that Deku had saved. As now with that being said, this is where we now do a time skip. Flashing forward to the next following days after those events, we now see Deku as well as Inko, as by this point, we see them all just simply hanging out with Eri, as Eri by this point has quickly warmed up to the two. As Inko had treated Eri like her daughter, all the while Deku had been unknowingly seen as an older brother by Eri, considering the fact that whenever she wanted something, Deku would always make sure to get it for her, whether it be candy as he would sneak into the hospital, or if she wanted to get like a teddy bear or a new book, he would always get it for her, even wasting his own money to do so. As due to all these actions, we would see Eri immediately warm up to the two, even to the point where she would smile at them. As throughout this time, we will see that Eri had basically joined the family, as all three of them were just always there, always making sure to support one another, with all of them of course caring for each other. Until eventually it will be finally the day that Eri actually leaves the hospital, as she was finally discharged. But when it came to where exactly they're going to place her, considering the fact that Eri had no family members, this is when Inko would actually sign up to adopt her. So with that, we will have Eri joining Deku's family, as Deku has now gotten a younger sister. But during the days that followed, we would see that Deku, after Eri had been added to the family, had been working overtime, with the main reason being the fact that Deku was trying his best to protect her and his mother, while also trying to maintain his life. As after Eri had been added to the family, we see that Overhaul has sent multiple different enemies to capture Eri, and also hunt down Deku and the rest of his family. As basically every single day there will be a new villain coming to attack Deku, with each one of them having unique quirks and abilities, but Deku being obviously able to take them down easily, without any difficulty at all. But due to this happening, this will cause Overhaul to get even more annoyed with Deku, all the way up to the point where he decides to do his most biggest scheme yet, as he decides to make a deal with All for One. As we now change scenes. So we see Deku, as we will see him currently right now in the midst of working, as currently right now it was his job to take out the garbage for the restaurant. But just as Deku was walking to the trash can to do so, this is when suddenly he senses a presence nearby, causing him to sigh as he thinks it's just another villain. But just as Deku was just simply gonna ignore him and toss out the garbage, this is when the villain would then attack, causing Deku to once again sigh, as he then kicks the villain away, causing him to be sent flying, as Deku still needed to throw away the garbage. And once he was able to do so, he would then finally set his attention onto the villain, only to see that it was a villain that he'd never seen before, as you see Deku was getting attacked by none other than a Nomu, as the deal that Overhaul had made with All For One would then be revealed. As you see, in exchange for funding All For One's projects, Overhaul had just simply asked for Nomus whenever he needed it, with All For One actually agreeing to these terms, mostly because of the fact that more funding was never bad. So due to that, Overhaul now has access to Nomus, to which he'll be using them to send towards Deku, with this Nomu of course having a very unique ability to attempt to counter Deku's. But the thing is, as we now change back to the fight, we see Deku's he'll be easily handling this Nomu, as even though the Nomu had a very specific ability that can counter Deku's, Deku was still able to beat him relatively easily, as we would see the end of the fight with Deku cratering the Nomu's face into the ground, with the Nomu not being able to do anything in response to that. As now with the Nomu defeated, this is where we will then see Deku call the police, with the police arriving but also heroes as well, which you know that Deku is going to be very annoyed about the whole thing. As throughout that time you will see the Nomu then get inspected, as unknown to Deku was the fact that throughout this time you will see that the event with Deku facing off against the Nomu happened during the time of the USJ incident, as now this actually caused the heroes to theorize exactly what was going on, as why the students of UA were getting targeted, but now also this seemingly normal and random boy at a restaurant. As due to them not drawing up any conclusions, this is where UA would then get involved as they try to get into contact with Deku getting increasingly annoyed about the whole thing. As we now change our perspective to someone else, we see Overhaul as he'll be in a very dark room, watching as the news was covering all the events, including about what happened with Deku. As although Deku's fight with the Nomu was not revealed and everything, they do pretty much let everyone know that a Nomu was targeting a random boy at a restaurant, with Deku's face not being shown at all, but Overhaul knew that it was him, as hearing a mere mention of Deku would cause Overhaul to literally lose his shit, as he would then grab a control and slam it directly at the TV, causing it to be destroyed. As Overhaul would be glaring angrily at the TV, this is when he would then begin cursing out at Deku, as he actually begins to truly hate Deku for ruining all his plans. But it didn't matter, as he always had more than enough opportunities, as he could always get more Nomus. He could eventually end up getting Deku or maybe even his family, as he will one way or another get Eri back, whether Deku wanted him to or not, and he didn't care who he needed to hurt to do so. As we now do a little bit of a time skip. Now flashing forward after those events, we end up seeing Deku, as by this point he's just trying his best to maintain his life, but unfortunately was failing miserably, as he will be continuously getting interrupted by villains as well as future heroes. As now, for some odd and very stupid reason, students from UA are now going to his restaurant and are now trying to become his so-called friends, as they will be asking Deku questions about his personal life, and they'll be, trying to find out what exactly are his interests, his dislikes, with Deku giving them very vague answers, trying to show them the signs saying that, hey, I do not want to be your friend. And it wasn't just the students, it was also the teacher and staffs, as he would see literal pro heroes stopping at the restaurant just having a discussion with Deku, not even ordering anything, which pisses Deku off even more, as the only person that was really happy about this was the restaurant owner, as now thanks to heroes actually arriving at the restaurant, this gave the restaurant much more popularity, and this would cause Deku to be even more annoyed. Meanwhile, Overhaul would keep sending more villains at Deku that he needs to deal with, causing Deku to be even more annoyed and even more tired with the whole thing. Luckily for Deku, however, all that would then come to an end for a short period of time, as during the UA Sports Festival, in order to prepare for the events, you would see the students then actually take a short break from visiting the restaurant, and even Overhaul stopped sending villains at Deku, considering the fact that he realized that it wasn't working, this giving Deku a break from everything as his life returns back to being normal for a little while, as it gives him the opportunity to do his work in peace but also spend some time with his family. As speaking of the family thing, things are going very great, as even though Deku was working throughout the rest of the day, whenever he would return back home, he would immediately relax, as both Eri and Inko would always be there to welcome him, as every single one of them would have a lovely family dinner as they just talk about their days, with Deku not explaining to them about the whole villain situation or the hero thing, considering the fact that he didn't want to worry them, as thankfully Deku was able to spend this time with his family in peace, without worrying about any villains or heroes getting in the way. Or at least he was able to do so until the unfortunate end of the UA Sports Festival, as by that time we will see everything go back to being chaotic for Deku, as now villains are approaching him once again and the UA students are bothering him, including the UA staff, as we see Deku going through all this with a miserable expression. as this is where we now do a time skip. Now flashing forward through the days, we end up seeing Deku as he finally gets a break from all the UA students, as it will be finally time for the internships. As we see all the students then go to their internships, leaving Deku alone at the restaurant, allowing him to work in peace. Or so he thought. Cause you see, during the middle of the night, as Deku would be once again tasked with the job of closing up the restaurant, this is when suddenly individuals would then walk in, causing Deku to have a sense of deja vu, as he would then turn around to see who exactly was trespassing, and when he sees who it is, this is when he then raises an eyebrow as he sees three interesting individuals, as it will be none other than Overhaul, Shigaraki, and Kodogiri, as this is where we now do a flashback. Throughout the time of the UA Sports Festival, we see as Deku will be actually having this peaceful opportunity to spend time with his family and work in peace, we will see Overhaul behind the scenes actually deciding to join the League of Villains, but in exchange for him joining them, he actually asked them to help him retrieve back Eri, considering the fact that all his men as well as the Nomu were useless. And when both Shigaraki and Kodogiri heard about this, they then decided to agree to it. As after all, Overhaul had a very powerful ability, and not only that, but the amount of money that this man had could most definitely benefit the League of Villains. So due to that, they decided to agree to it. As this is where we now cut back to the present. We see Deku once again as he'll be focusing on the task at hand, this being the fact he was trying to finish washing all the dishes so that way he can close the restaurant. But while he was doing this, he would then hear Overhaul then try to make a deal with him, as he was trying to make a deal in exchange for Eri. But Deku would immediately disagree with it, as instead he would just tell them to leave, as he was once again trying to do this without starting a fight. But this response of course irritates Overhaul, as this is when he then begins to threaten Deku, as both Shigaraki as well as Kodogiri then begin to back him up, as they both actually begin to activate their quirks menacingly, as Shigaraki was just waiting for the command of Overhaul to then attack Deku and just wipe this kid out. But Deku however was not having none of that, as instead this is when Deku then begins to put them all in their place, as the pressure begins to fill up the entire area, one so strong that it brings every one of the individuals down to their knees and shakes up the entirety of the restaurant. As this is when Deku would then give them all a warning, telling them to leave him and his family alone or else there will be consequences. As we see Deku's expression become hollow and cold, causing Shigaraki, Kodogiri, and Overhaul to panic, as the pressure increases even more, shaking up the restaurant and causing these guys to become paler and paler by the second, until eventually it just stops. As this is when Deku would then tell them to leave his restaurant for the final time, to which they do so. As just like that, Deku would then close up the restaurant and head back home, as this is where we now do another time skip. So flashing forward to a few months after that interaction, we see Deku actually having a peaceful time as villains were no longer sent to attack him. And not only that, but the UA students and UA staff workers were too busy with their own activities to come visit the restaurant, allowing for Deku to enjoy himself and relax both at his job and at his home. As we see for the rest of the following months that went by, we see Deku actually having a pretty nice moment with his family, as he'll be giving some advice to Eri as she had been asking about his martial arts, as she had seen him train and practice all the different techniques, so she wanted to learn at least how to do that, thinking that if she was strong like that, she may have control over her quirk. With Deku of course giving her some advice after Inko had convinced him, but he does always tell her to always use it responsibly and only for self-defense, to which she obviously knows that. And this actually ends up leading to a very interesting conversation with Inko, as she ends up telling Deku that he could become a teacher, as he seems to have the very skill and not only that but the patience to handle it. And this causes Deku to then remember his old master Bang from his old life. As remembering him, Deku actually smiles as he thinks of the concept, wondering exactly how would Bang feel if he became a sensei. But for now he decided to put it in the back of his head as he still had more work to do. As for the next following days that went by, we see Deku just continuously going on with this peaceful life, until eventually all that comes crashing down. As during the few months that went by, we end up seeing multiple events happening to UA, with the latest one being the Hideout Raid arc. As during that arc, we end up seeing All For One getting captured as he had been defeated by All Might after a very fierce battle. And not only that, but we also saw All Might retiring as he had lost One For All, as now his successor is the one who's supposed to step up after him. But now with All Might retired and no symbol of peace, we will see crime skyrocketing throughout these days, with villains acting more chaotically every single passing second. As we now change our attention to the League of Villains, As throughout this time, we will see that Shigaraki, who was supposed to be the leader of the League of Villains, was currently down on his luck. As after all the events that transpired between All For One and All Might, and being there to witness it all before eventually getting teleported away, not being able to do anything to help the man he saw as a father, we will see that Shigaraki would be emotionally vulnerable at the moment. And seeing that their supposed leader was not acting, this means that someone else has to step up. This being the only person who could. The one who's been funding the entirety of the League of Villains the most. This being obviously Overhaul. Now when Overhaul heard that All For One was captured, to say that he would be happy would be an understatement. He was gleefully excited about it, considering the fact that now that All For One was out of the picture, that meant that the rest of All For One's resources, funding, and basically all his research and everything basically belonged to Overhaul, as he gladly paid for everything, causing all of All For One's resources as well as connections to now work for him, as now Overhaul steps up as leader for the League of Villains, as he ends up telling them all that he's going to get things back on track, but first things first, they're going to need to take care of something very important, something that's very crucial to his own plans. As this is where we now do a change of scenes. We now turn our attention to Deku as we see him currently right now pulling up for work, but when he ends up arriving there, he ends up seeing something that actually annoys him, as he will see the restaurant that he's been working at for the past few years now being burnt to the ground, as Deku will be looking at all of this with a blank and hollow expression, as this will be the signal that announces the beginning of an entirely new era, as we now end up doing another time skip. So flashing forward to a couple of days after that event, we end up seeing Deku as he actually was still working the same job, and the way he was able to do so was by simply using his cosmic abilities. Yes, were they extremely dangerous, and yes, they did cause the end of his old timeline, but at the same time, Deku felt bad for the restaurant owner, who was always nice to Deku and always made sure to give him breaks when needed. So due to that, Deku used his cosmic abilities to rewind time and fix up all the damage. Now, for the next couple of days after that, we see Deku trying his best to ignore everything that was happening around him, as now villains are once again approaching Deku, bothering him and trying to beat him up, with Deku of course showing them that he's not one to mess with, beating them all up, and immediately taking care of the problem. And even then, Yue was starting to bother him again as well, as once again students begin popping up at his job, as he tries his best to ignore them and focus on work. As no matter how many times people try to bother him, he always tried his best to ignore it and focus on life, as after all, that's really all he could do. As after all, that's all he wanted ever since he got reincarnated. That's all he's been working for throughout his entire life, as all he ever wanted to do was to simply live an honest to normal life, not to cause any more harm to others. But unfortunately, it seems as if people kept getting in his way and people kept bothering him when all he wanted to do was for them to leave him alone. As all this will then soon boil over onto one certain day, as we see Deku currently right now finishing up his latest run for the restaurant, as all he wanted to do right now was to simply get home, have a nice and relaxing family dinner, and soon afterwards go to bed. But as Deku was trying to get home, he'll be stopped by countless villains, with Deku of course beating the crap out of every last one of them, and he does so in very brutal fashion because of the fact of just how tired he was. As eventually we end up seeing Deku arrive back to his home, as he ends up parking the bike and just entering inside the house, expecting to see his mother and his sister there waiting for him. But as Deku would enter the house, he will see that the lights were completely out, which was confusing considering the fact that none of them go to sleep this early. But still, nonetheless, he decided to shrug it off, as he'll then enter inside the house, and when he does, he'll call out to both Eri and Inko, but this is when he would then actually end up hearing someone else respond, as this is when Deku would then see Overhaul as well as the rest of the League of Villains just chilling in his house, as Deku would see both Inko and Eri currently right now huddle up together as they'll be shaking in fear, as Shigaraki would be right next to Inko and Overhaul right next to Eri. As Overhaul by this point then begins to mock Deku and being sarcastic with him, telling him that Deku's last words that he said to Overhaul hurt him very deeply and he wanted some revenge. But you see, the thing is, Deku was not having fun with anything that Overhaul had to say to him, as he was stone cold faced the entire time, showing a very hollow and cold expression. And Overhaul, seeing this, already could tell that Deku was about to lose his lid any second now, as this is when Overhaul then tells Deku that he should blame himself for what's about to happen. As this is when suddenly portals then begin to open up, as we see every member of the League of Villains then escape, with Deku's family getting captured. Although while Deku, seeing this happening, will then try to rush over to stop them, only to feel an explosion then be triggered underneath his feet. as in that very next moment we will then see Deku as well as the rest of his home then get blown up. All the while Deku's family is currently right now in the clutches of the League of Villains. As this is where we now do a change of scenes. We now turn our attention to a couple of villains, as currently right now they were just running chaos throughout the streets, driving on their cars as they were making sure to cause as much property damage as possible, as this was their way to rebel against the entire hero system. But just as they were doing this though, this is when suddenly in a flash, someone would jump onto the top of their car, causing them to immediately panic, as this is when the very same person would then grab the both of them by the neck and then suddenly pull them out of the car, causing it to swerve out of control and eventually crash, causing a ginormous fire to then erupt. Now, by the time that we end up turning our attention to who was on the roof of the car, we see that not only is the person gone, but also are the two villains that he took along with him. As this is where we now once again change scenes to a different area. We now see the two villains as they were currently right now being interrogated by this person, and by interrogated I mean that they were getting the living crap beaten out of them, as they begin telling him over and over again that they have no idea exactly who he's talking about, but the person wasn't listening. He kept beating them over and over again, as this is when the person would then be revealed. It will be Deku, as he's revealed to be completely unscathed. As we now do a little bit of a flashback. Turning back to when the villains have blown up Deku's house, we end up seeing Deku after the explosion, as he is revealed to be completely unscathed. But you see, Deku right now was downright pissed, as literally Deku just simply cannot understand exactly why does something like this have to happen, as all he was trying to do is to atone for his sins of the past, and that was it. He was trying to not harm anyone, he was trying to be left alone, but people kept pushing his buttons, and now they're gonna have to deal with the consequences. As this is when we will then see Deku then beginning to release his cosmic energy. The energy being so powerful that it actually begins causing earthquakes around the entire area. As this is when we will then see Deku's entire house then be built up, as he was slowly rewinding time on all the damage that happened to the house, fixing it up without any difficulties. But you see, the thing is, while Deku could use his time traveling powers to go back in time and obviously stop the villains from, capturing his family, he actually instead wanted to hunt them down, as he wants to show them exactly what are the consequences when it came to dealing with someone like him. So with that, this is where we would then see Deku then actually go on a hunt, for the first time in a very long time. As we now cut back to the present, we will see Deku as he'll be appearing and disappearing in different locations, and when he does, he'll be there trying his best to hunt down exactly where Overhaul and the rest of his group is currently hiding. And you see, Deku would be doing this as he'll be beating the crap out of multiple villains and interrogating them, trying to find out exactly where they're hiding. And along the way, Deku did encounter a couple of heroes who tried to stop him, as in their eyes they saw Deku just beating the crap out of some random civilians, and they thought that Deku was being a villain. But you see, the thing is, when heroes got in the way, Deku would gladly beat the crap out of them. He didn't care for the justice system, he didn't care whether they be heroes or villains, monsters, he didn't care about none of that. All he wanted to do was find his family and beat the living crap out of those that took them away from him. As we see Deku continue on with his hunt, with anyone that tried to get in his ways, whether it be heroes or villains, getting beaten up to a bloody pulp, as he continues just trying to hunt down for his family. But as he was doing this though, as Deku would actually beat the living crap out of another villain, this is when the villain would then reveal exactly where they may potentially be staying. And when Deku hears this, he actually ends up smiling fairly, as he then beats the guy even harder because of the fact he went ahead and told him this before finally rushing over to the location. As this is where we will now do a change of scenes. So we see Deku once again, as by this point he had arrived at the location, which was a warehouse. As he would then calmly end up bursting through the front gates of the warehouse, and when he does, he would then walk in like he owns the place. This catching the attention of the League of Villains, who were still discussing their next move, all the while Overhaul was trying to get into operation, so that way he can get back to working on his project by using Eri. As the League of Villains would then turn their attention onto Deku, who had arrived, and when they do, they'll be very surprised considering the fact that they weren't expecting him to find them so quickly. Because you see, the thing is, just to let you guys know, and just for you guys to remember this, Deku did all this in one night. As throughout the time that Deku was beating the crap out of villains and heroes, as throughout the time that Deku was interrogating them, and even that time when Deku had repaired the house, he did all this in one night. And just to let you know, when the League of Villains had escaped from Deku, all that happened 1 hour ago. As literally Deku was able to find them all in 1 hour. Now, seeing him appearing right in front of them, this would cause all of them to actually be thrown off guard and actually be a little bit fearful of him, all the while Overhaul would just simply chuckle. as he tells Deku that he's stupid to approach him out like this before telling the rest of the League of Villains to just simply kill him. As this is when all the League of Villains would then try to attack Deku, each one of them using their quirk, but the thing is, it was completely ineffective, especially when they're facing off against a Deku who was truly pissed. As this is when, moving so fast that only half of them were able to react, this is when we will then see Deku then take on the entirety of the League of Villains, except for Overhaul all by himself, as Deku will be completely overwhelming every last one of them. As the first one to attack Deku would be Dabi, with Deku obviously avoiding his flames relatively easily, before beating the living crap out of him. But right before Deku can really get into it, this is when suddenly Twice will then try to intervene, as he summons out multiple amounts of clones to bum rush Deku. And Deku, seeing all these clones approaching him, would then scoff, as he would then begin to treat these clones as if he was Madara facing off against the entirety of the elemental nations, as he begins dog walking every last one of them. As the next villain to attack Deku will be Toga, to which, yeah, I'm sorry, there's not really much Toga can really do, but yeah, she gets quickly wiped out, as this is when every last one of them will then try to do a combination attack against Deku, as Deku will be there just simply avoiding their attacks, beating up every last one of them, as this is when Kodagiri then gets an idea, as by using his portals, he will then begin to actually send out different attacks by using others in order to kind of catch Deku off guard, as basically everyone's attacks that were happening were coming from different directions, causing Deku to be caught off guard by some of them and causing him to be blindsided. But the thing is, even when Deku gets caught off guard or blindsided, he is still able to dodge them, he is still able to finesse all of them, and was able to beat every last member of the League of Villains. As one by one, every last one of them would then fall to Deku, as the only one left standing by the time that Deku's finished would be Overhaul. And speaking of Overhaul, we see him trying to escape with Eri as well as Inko, as he was trying his best to escape from Deku in order for him to continue on with his plans. But just as he was trying to do so, this is when suddenly he would then feel Deku's presence right behind him, causing him to stop, as you'll see Deku only casually walking towards him with a cold expression. Now Overhaul, seeing this, already knows that his entire squad got wiped out, as in a very last desperate attempt, this is when suddenly he would then pull out a gun, as he then tries to destroy Deku's quirk by shooting a quirk destroying bullet. As the bullet would then hit Deku straight on, with Deku not even reacting to it, as this will cause Overhaul to then chuckle as he begins explaining the effects of the bullet. But you see, the thing is, this does something that Overhaul was not expecting, as instead the pressure that Deku was releasing grew even stronger, as when Deku finally found out exactly what Overhaul was using Eri for, it causes Deku to then suddenly lose his shit, as he would then suddenly end up releasing this pressure that was so strong that it actually begins to shake up the entire warehouse, as Overhaul begins to back away in fear, as this is when he then asks Deku exactly how he was still standing and how he was still able to use his quirk, as this is when Deku then casually revealed that he was quirkless, saying that he doesn't need no useless ability like those to take care of someone like Overhaul. And hearing this would cause Overhaul to lose his shit as well, as this is when in pure anger, Overhaul would then suddenly slam his hand into the ground as he activates his quirk at full capacity, as he was trying to blow away Deku and also Eri as well as Inko, as he was so angry that he didn't care that he needed Eri for his projects, as all he wanted to do right now was to simply wipe Deku off the face of the earth. As Deku would see the attack approaching and see both Eri and Inko about to be caught up in it, as is when we will then see him disappear in a flash, as we end up seeing the entire warehouse that they were in be completely destroyed by Overhaul. And Overhaul did all this, and unknowingly what he did was also finishing off the rest of the League of Villains, as every last one of them were killed off due to his powerful attack. As just like that, we will then see Overhaul then emerge from all the rubble as he begins laughing over the fact that he was able to beat Deku and that he was finally dead. As he didn't care now that Eri was gone, he didn't care about all the damage he did, he didn't care that he lost one of the biggest allies that he had with him at the time, as all that mattered was the fact that finally no one was going to be able to get in his way. So what if he lost Eri? He could always start again. He could always find another person just like her with a similar ability, and his project will continue on, as his dream of to make an entire world without quirks will come to fruition, whether people like it or not. As we end up seeing Overhaul as he begins to lose his mind at that very moment, this is when suddenly he will then feel pressure, one that is so powerful that it does not only affect Overhaul, but affects the entirety of the world, as we see the world itself shaking from this pressure, as this is when Overhaul would then shakily turn around only to see Deku still alive, as Deku would be there casually holding onto both Inko and Eri, making sure that they were safe. But you see, while Deku was doing so, this is when Overhaul would then notice that his appearance had changed, as Deku had entered a certain transformation. One so powerful that it literally caused the entirety of his old timeline to be destroyed, as Deku had entered his cosmic state, using the cosmic powers bestowed upon him, but this time he was going to use it in a fitting manner. As after making sure that both Eri as well as Inko is safe, this is when Deku would then turn his attention onto Overhaul. And just by Deku doing that, this is when we would then see Overhaul then collapse down to his knees. No, collapse down to the very floor itself, as he was unable to move, as this pressure was so strong that he felt as if gravity was literally increasing due to it. As Deku would then approach Overhaul, letting him know that he really screwed up, telling Overhaul that everything that was about to happen was due to his own actions. Cause if Overhaul just simply followed Deku's advice and followed Deku's warning, then he could have lived a lot longer. Because in fact, Deku would not even hunt him down. He wouldn't even care about Overhaul. Yet here he was, doing all the wrong moves, making all the wrong decisions, and now led to what was about to happen now. As after Deku then approaches Overhaul, this is when he would then casually end up picking him up with one hand. As Overhaul would then be lifted up into the air, as he ends up panicking as he tries his best to escape from him, he even tries to use his quirk on Deku, but for some weird reason it wasn't working. As this is when Deku would then begin Overhaul's punishment, as using his cosmic abilities to the fullest, but only focusing it on Overhaul. This is when we would then see both Deku and Overhaul then suddenly end up disappearing right in front of both Inko and Eri's eyes. Now both of the two will be extremely worried for Deku, as they wonder exactly what happened to him and where he went. As we now end up changing scenes, we see Overhaul as he's now pretty much in a completely infinite void, as he wonders exactly what was this place. As the next thing he would hear will be Deku's booming voice, as he shows Overhaul exactly just how insignificant he was to Deku, showing Overhaul just how much power he had, showing Overhaul just how many times he could have killed him, showing Overhaul just how many times he could have made him suffer, and most importantly of all, showing Overhaul just how pathetic his dream truly was. As compared to the entirety of the universe, as compared to even Deku himself, Overhaul's dream literally meant nothing. As Deku would make sure to engrave it into Overhaul's mind, as he begins to flood Overhaul with a bunch of information, one that was so traumatic to Overhaul, as we see him literally accelerating in age. As Deku would then state that this punishment is for all the years that Overhaul had traumatized Eri for. As just like that, we would then see Overhaul then turn into a shriveled up old man, as his hair becomes white and his skin becomes wrinkled up. As after seeing the aftermath of his punishment, this is when Deku would then suddenly end up teleporting them back, as we now do a time skip. Turning to only a few minutes later, we end up seeing both police as well as heroes arrive on the scene at the warehouse, as they end up arriving to see what's left of the League of Villains, and more importantly, they end up arriving to see what's left of Overhaul. As we see Overhaul just casually sitting there, but the thing is, he'll be a very old man who would be only barely able to move. As the heroes seeing him there would immediately rush over to interrogate him, but when they do, they end up finding out exactly who he is. And although his appearance is very drastic compared to how he was, they still decide to turn him in. As just like that, Overhaul will end up getting captured. As we now turn our attention to Deku, we see Deku once again, as we see him currently right now making family dinner, as he'll be there actually in the kitchen cooking, as he apologizes to his family for putting them in danger and not being able to save them much sooner. But as he was in the process of doing this is when suddenly Inko as well as Eri would then hop in the kitchen as well, as they also begin to help him cook, as they tell Deku that it was alright and even tell him that it was not his fault, as they apologize that Deku had to be there to protect all of them, although they were not able to do anything. And when Deku hears this, he tells them not to feel guilty about it, to which they tell him the same thing. As we see the entire family going back and forth while they cook dinner, until eventually they finally decide to settle it by saying that it was no one's fault. And more importantly, we actually see Inko give Deku some pretty good advice, one that actually causes him to look back on everything that he did, both in this timeline and his old one, as her advice had actually given Deku the ability to move past his old guilt, as he's finally able to let go of the past and actually focus much more on the future. As after receiving those final bits of advice, this is where we will then see Deku then have a nice family dinner with the rest of his family, as every last one of them would be smiling and enjoying the moment. As this is where we will now do our last time skip. Following the years after those events, we end up seeing Deku's family once again for the last time. We see that Eri by this point is currently right now heading off to school, as now with Overhaul gone, she was finally able to live her life to the fullest, a good and healthy life, as she was now making friends with others, and not only that, but she had much more control over her quirk thanks to Deku helping her. And speaking of Deku, now turning to him, we see that Deku by this point has actually become a sensei, as after actually showing off his martial arts and everything, and after getting a generous amount of funding for it, this is when Deku was actually able to open up his own martial arts school to teach the fighting style that his old master taught him. But this time he was going to make sure that none of them end up like him, as he always made sure to help them out mentally, while also making sure to teach them restraint as well as control. As this is where we now turn to the final moments of this what if. We see Deku as currently right now he'll be teaching up the new generation of quirk users. As by this point, Deku's martial art has gotten quite famous, as there have been people who had been quirkless actually becoming heroes because of this martial arts. Now Deku of course was very annoyed about the whole thing, but still nonetheless he was not gonna just turn away a student, especially since there were many of them that desperately needed this, considering the fact that many of them were just like Deku, underdogs who didn't have a say in anything. And although he didn't really like the way that things turned out, there was no way he was gonna stop. As we now turn to the final scene of this what if. We see Deku once again, as currently right now, he'll be just casually sitting down, sipping some sake, as he'll be actually looking at two gravestones. This being the gravestone for his old master, and the gravestone for the young kid that he had befriended. As you see, Deku had made this as a way to pay respect to the two of them, even though they have been dead for multiple years now. As currently right now, Deku was hoping that the two of them were proud of him at the very moment. As after sharing one last drink of sake with them, this is where we will then see Deku then get up and leave as he prepares for his next class. As this will be the end to What If Deku was Garou's reincarnation. Thank y'all so much for tuning into this what if. It was really fun to make, especially when it came to just simply scripting the entire thing out, and when it came to how exactly I wanted Deku's character to be like for the series. As I really liked the idea of Garou going through a whole redemption type path when it came to Deku, and I also liked him actually coming to the realization of exactly how Saitama felt, considering the fact that both Garou and Saitama are pretty similar when you think about it, as both of them were humans who had broken their limits and had achieved a power that only gods were able to wield. As I really liked the idea of Garou finally coming to understand Saitama, and that's exactly what I tried to present here. I'm sorry to everyone that did not like it, and I'm sorry for those that wanted to see villain Garou and everything, but when I see a redemption story, unfortunately I'm just gonna have to go with it. But who knows, maybe one day I'm gonna remake this entire what if, and do a whole villain Deku type theme. We're just gonna have to wait and see until then. But for now guys, I really hope you guys do enjoy this what if. I know I personally enjoyed making it, and really just enjoyed the story. But other than that, I don't really have much else to say, so with that being said, it's your host HD Samurai here, and he's signing off. So peace, and have a lovely day.
Colors, this is the color, this is the color, this is the color, this is